Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to the first afternoon session of our 2023 Leading Transformational Change Summit. I am Tracy Tyler, and I am the founder and managing principal of Strategies for Success International, a boutique firm focusing on strategic organizational capability with a focus on leaders, teams, and organizations, and executive coaching, leadership development, and strategy, organization development, and organization design. Today, I'm very happy that we are joined by James Papiano, who is the president of James Papiano and Company, a coaching and consulting firm working with leaders and their teams in technology, financial services, academic medical centers, nonprofits, and other business sectors. James has had experience leading transformations in his HR roles and as a coach and consultant, and has had the privilege of working with top leaders who are leading transformations of their own. He's a member of the Consortium for Change and a fellow at the Institute of Coaching. Today, James is going to talk to us about the leader experience in times of transformation. So it's with great pleasure I'd like to introduce James Papiano. James.
Thank you, Tracy. Thanks so much. I'm really happy to be here to talk about something that is at once obvious, but also perhaps we don't get enough attention. One of the things in my practice that I pay a lot of attention to is the leader experience. And, for those of us who are in this business, or for those of us who have been in the workforce for some time, we talk a lot about employee experience. But today I'm going to talk about leader experience, particularly in terms of transformation and the opportunities when you're leading a transformational change effort. What are those developmental opportunities for you? Essentially, the sort of shorthand for what I'm going to talk about today is a cliche in our culture. It's this phrase that we hear, many times a year. Somebody says, or you say to someone, "Put your mask on first before you help other people." It is a cliche because it's true, but I want to point out, as obvious and as everyday as this phrase is, we often blow by it. And we forget that the oxygen mask is actually a metaphor of survival. It's not just so that you can help other people, it's so that you can help yourself. And that's what we're going to dial in today. We're going to dial in ways that you can keep your oxygen mask on in particularly acute pressure-filled moments or long hauls, and transformation qualifies on both counts. So to get started, I want to ask you to keep some questions in mind as I go through a sort of a brief model that I use with my clients. The first question is, what are your oxygen mask strategies? How do you manage your recovery? How do you take care of yourself? How do you optimize your performance and contributions that you make in your job? Once you have those in mind, consider right now just sort of a blank response. Is your mask on this week? And if it is, or even if it's not, what is the percentage of oxygen that you're getting? Is it a really good seal? Is there not so much oxygen in the tank, so even with a good seal, it's not really providing much relief for you? So put a number on it if you can, just a complete guess. And say, if you were at 80%, I would say that was really good. Most people are not at 80% consistently if you ask them this question. But then consider, whatever your number was, what happens if you're down 10 or 20%? Typically, that's a pretty significant change for most leaders. And yet we don't make the connection to, how do I get my oxygen mask back on, and how do I keep it on sustainably? Also consider that if you have, say, you're telling me, James, I'm at 80% right now, and there's this 20% potential. Any increment that you can move from 80 to 81%, or if you're at 60, if you can move from 60 to 61%, this last gap, whatever it is for you right now, is probably the hardest. But it also means that any incremental improvement will have outsized impact on your performance and your effectiveness as a leader. It will also improve your leader experience. So typically, when we talk about transformational change efforts, we're very focused on the business. We're very focused on the organization and the work that we have to do and the outcomes that we're looking for. And those efforts have a lot of success factors. It's very complex, but a lot of them fall into the categories I put here. It has to do with the broader culture. It has to do with the plan and the implementation of that plan, the knowledge, skills, and experience of the leadership teams, etc. But the thing about all of these, which is very typical, is that they are things that you don't control entirely. In fact, you have, as the transformation wears on, you probably have less and less control of things like the plan. And so I'm not saying give up control here, but what I am saying is just call it for what it is and realize that you may have more powerful levers available to you that would impact the outcome of your performance and therefore your team's performance, and then so on down the line. So getting sort of granular about that, I want to talk about what I see as higher control success factors. These are success factors that you have much more direct control over. And if you choose to use that control, it will shift your attention in really productive ways. So basically, if you see the top of that pyramid there, performance, your performance, the impact that you're having, your contributions are really only determined by the actions that you take, your behavior, your conduct, the choices you make. But that in itself, that behavior is based on your thinking. And we know that your thinking is also based on your feeling or your mood. We know that feeling precedes reasoning, and often reasoning is really just stamping the feeling. So as I go down this list, you can be thinking about ways in which all of these things impact the choices you make every day. Underneath feeling, there's emotion. And what I mean by that is a sense of the energy you have that is either high energy or low energy, or is it pleasant or unpleasant energy? And that's even before you put a word on it in terms of a feeling. And then underneath that is your body systems, right? So your circulatory system, your neural system, these kind of things are all sending you signals all the time. So when we think about high performance in high pressure environments, we have to think about the entire organism. So that's the bad news, because a lot of people don't think about their whole selves when they're thinking about their performance. So it can take a little bit of work to move into this frame of reference. The good news is that if you can see here, there are 5 levers that you have to impact the way that you're performing and your effectiveness, especially during high performance times. So this is where we're going to dial in. The autonomic nervous system, which everyone's going to be familiar with, is basically that system which determines whether we're in a fight, flight, freeze, or faint response to events, or we are in a rest and digest, or something that's a little bit more open and relaxed. When you're going through a transformation, or you're in any kind of performance moment, your brain, like it's doing every other millisecond of the day, is trying to predict what's happening and then protect you, not just from saber-toothed tigers, because that's probably not really a threat right now, but from social threats. And so if you perceive a social threat and your sympathetic autonomic nervous system is activated, you become stressed and anxious. There's a hormone cascade that reduces memory, reduces focus, and lowers performance. But as professionals, we've all been training ourselves over the years to move towards a more open, relaxed state, which of course creates a hormone cascade that increases memory, increases creativity, supports better problem solving, etc. The approach that I'm going to talk about right now is meant to help you self-regulate more to the right, where you can stay more open and relaxed, even in acute situations. But it takes planning and it takes intention to do that. Okay, so wherever you are, I'm hoping that you'll find something useful, a little tidbit here that you can use in your transformation or in your career generally. So just 3 legs of the stool here in terms of finding a developmental framework for yourself in times of transformational change. The first is looking at energy management and how can you make adjustments to that. The second is accelerating learning. Not just finding the lessons learned, but accelerating the rate at which you're learning. And third is, and this is probably the thing that's hardest to articulate and hardest to understand, is a willingness to be changed by the experience of going through this transformation. The willingness to allow unfolding events to happen and to see yourself growing and evolving and changing, even to the point of having your own personal transformation within the context of a larger organizational transformation. So let's break these 3 things down a little bit. Energy management. All this stuff that I'm going to mention, again, is obvious, but probably underutilized as levers of performance for most executives. First, and most obviously, sleep, nutrition, and exercise. Typically, this is something that we all fall down on someplace along the line, and it's really just about getting back up on the horse, but having that intention to do that. Second, get a physical, blood test, dental check, anything else that you need to get or that you've been putting off. I am surprised that I need to say this to clients. In fact, I am surprised I have to say this to physicians, physician leaders who weren't getting their blood tests. But there's no way for you to know what's happening unless you measure it or unless you have a professional look at it. And that's an important piece. Create a cadence for reflection, and this can come in a lot of different ways, but it could be going to a concert or a play, it could be being in nature, it could be a spiritual practice, or it could just be journaling. Additionally, you can look at your recovery practice and your boundaries. So this is social time, time alone, one-on-one time with important relationships. For those of you who have been through transformations or really crazy times, you know that these things fall by the wayside. And what we know from research and from just lived experience is that these are the things that help us stay in our best shape. Enhanced self-care here. All of this that I'm listing today is self-care in some way, but enhanced self-care would be things like retreats, flotation tanks, massage, things that you might have to spend more money or spend a little bit more time or make wedge into your calendar somewhere, but might pay off for you. And then lastly, but no less important, is that adding people to your bench when you know you're going into a pressure moment is a great move. And I want to say, there are 2 things here that I think people overlook the most. Well, although all of them could be overlooked, it's the therapist and the personal services that I think people underplay. Even if it's just temporarily having someone run errands for you. I was with a client recently who was talking about thinking about getting a babysitter because they're going into a pretty tight time, and otherwise they would just be home with their kid. But now, because the schedule's going to be tighter and the pressure's going to be higher, they're thinking about getting a babysitter. That's a good move. A therapist is also a good move. Whether or not you have any acute issues, I could talk for a long time about the fact that adult leaders aren't finished developing. And so you might as well have an expert along the way with you to do that. And a trainer and a coach are sort of obvious. Accelerate learning. Now, again, as I said, this isn't just about finding the learnings. It is about accelerating the rate at which you're able to learn. So this requires that rest and digest side of the autonomic nervous system It requires you to be open and not on edge to accelerate this. And it requires you to be sort of intentional. And so there are 3 questions here that I share with you as ways for you to pace yourself and to pace others as a way of going slow to go fast on learning. So the first question is, am I learning as a leader as fast as my team and organization needs me to learn? Is my team learning as fast as the business needs us to learn together? That's the second question. So we're getting sort of wider scope. And the third question is the organization learning as fast as we need to during transformation? These questions are very grounding. They'll typically disrupt whatever patterns happening in the group or for yourself. They slow things down a little bit. And what results is not just, again, finding the lessons learned, but also figuring out where you need to tweak the system or change your behaviors or change your thinking in order to accelerate the speed at which you're learning. And some ways you can do that, I'm going to point out here at the bottom of the slide. If you're going to lean into your learning leader, you probably are going to have to limit your learning focus at work during high pressure times, maybe all the time. But what I find is that when the fire hose opens up and people are, running around sort of on instinct, they forget that they have maybe a list of 2 or 3 things that are most important to their learning in the current moment. And they forget that they only need a minimal effective dose. You can easily over-index and extend yourself in trying to learn everything that there is to learn. And so the practice of learning how to focus your learning is really helpful. Additionally, things like video and audio make learning easy. And it also, things like a library card or an Audible subscription allows you to keep the flow of possible learning experiences open without a lot of effort. And this is really critical because you may be listening to, for example, a podcast or a book that you already know the content, you may have already listened to it, but because you're on a walk, you turn it on and something you already knew comes back to you, but it comes back to you in a different way because of your context. So it's this habit of learning that matters in accelerating the learning. And then finally, learn things outside of work. Please go, if you have a hobby, if you have something you've always wanted to do, make a tiny little space at least for that, because that helps refresh the learning circuits and can give you a break from the intense learning that you're doing during a transformation. Lastly, allow yourself to be changed. This is more of a psycho-spiritual move, but there are things that you can do sort of intentionally to allow it to unfold. First, observe yourself on this scale of rigidity and openness. If you're stressed, if you're overtaxed, if you're overloaded, you're going to tend towards rigidity, and that's going to really close you off to a lot of learning. It's going to affect your energy management. It's not going to be great. So when you see that happening, try to turn and soften and move towards more openness. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't control everything. So filtering for what you do control and don't control can reduce a lot of stress and improve your performance and your decision-making, and also improve your experience as a leader. When you're practicing candor, keep in mind, honesty doesn't require shouting. I'm surprised how many times I have to say this to leaders. But if you are grounded in the facts and you're giving a fair perspective, even if it's subjective, it doesn't require shouting. And that's also going to give you a better experience, even in the heat of the moment. And then finally, in real time, as your situation is unfolding, see the changes that are taking place in you. Get really curious about how this experience is affecting you, and talk with your coach or your therapist or your partner or whoever about what you're experiencing, so you can be learning in real time. So that's the basic idea. And as I said, there's nothing really new here. The revolutionary sort of radical idea is that you take yourself so seriously that you actually plan a little bit to do things differently during an intense period of performance. The other application for this, of course, is if you've been neglecting any of this, just in the daily, weekly, monthly kind of blocking and tackling, you can up your game a little bit here, both to improve your experience and to improve your performance. So I want to give you some examples of clients who I've seen, where I've seen them put this kind of thing into practice and where I've really started to learn about this myself. So the first example is about a COO. He went into an organization that was almost a teardown, not because the business was going to fail, but because everything in the business was in need of a total refurbishment or a build from scratch kind of situation. Additionally, they had not named this a transformation until many years in, and they could see what was happening. They started by doing like fighting fires, basically. And that lack of a label and the planning that goes into that, I think, is makes things harder when you have sort of a transformation foisted on you. Additionally, there were some problems at the board, and there was, at least in part, a new leadership team. What he did was, in his energy management, he was a meditator, so he continued to do that and even increased his commitment to meditation, which was very grounding. He liked to be in nature, he liked to be with family and friends, and he liked to travel, and he didn't give that up. He may have made some adjustments along the way, but he continued to do those things. On accelerated learning, he took some meditation classes, he had a coach, and he also learned a lot as he was teaching, other leaders and other managers about the changes that were happening in the organization. The impact and how it allowed him to change is that he revised his career plan. He realized that he had incredible talent for what he was doing, but he was not so interested in pursuing exactly the same kind of roles in the same kind of organizations. And so he allowed this to deeply change the way he thought about his future. The second example is what I call a crisis transformation, which happened for this president when the parent company imploded. There was obviously some legal work, there was some financial risk that it would naturally accompany that. The board, which was not quite a fully governing board as a subsidiary, was now had to stand on its own. And of course, all the employees were wondering what's next. So there's a lot of cross current, a lot of pressure here, a lot of uncertainty. So what he did was, this was a she, what she did was kept boundaries and worked remotely while still increasing a high amount of throughput. This preceded pandemic and continued through it. So that was a smart move. She took up boxing, which had a lot of resonance for her, with some things that were happening in her childhood where she wanted to be a dancer, and just the training for boxing was reminiscent of that. And she liked to be in nature, and she liked to take care of her dog. All those things became really important. She had a coach, a trainer, consultants, also consultants for board development and other advisors. And the boxing itself was a learning experience outside of work, which was really refreshing. It also channeled a lot of the feelings and pressure that she was feeling. And then integrating the experience, what happened as the crisis subsided, this leader refocused and defined the role that she had by handing off more operational duties and also leveraging these external people, so that as the dust settled, she was now in a much more focused role where she could add her highest value. So she really transformed herself there. And then lastly, this is just the story of a rock star who kept transforming, first smaller and then increasingly larger units, and people just wanted him to keep going. But he was at a pace that was perhaps too fast. He was starting to brown out, which was probably first noticed in his personal life, and then started to be seen elsewhere. And what was happening was his presence was not keeping pace with promotion. He had the technical skills and he had the vision in each case, but he was not able to have the gravitas or presence to lead change in the way that he needed to keep everybody focused and calm and that kind of thing. So what did he do? He reduced alcohol, increased exercise, enhanced sleep. And then he got a coach, a therapist, and consultants. And ultimately, this, I think it was the therapist probably in this case the most, found new grounding. And as a result, what was already going to plateau in his career, he had a breakthrough and started to be recruited into C-suite roles and actually has the presence to do that. So just to wrap up, what you can do now is think about your energy management, think about the rate at which you're learning, and think about your willingness to be changed by the experiences you're having at work. And my invitation to you is to not think that anything is too small. Anything you can do in this direction is going to have a positive cascade effect. Thanks.
Thank you, James. You did a fantastic job. Thank you, James. You did a fantastic job of packaging and articulating just how critical it is for leaders to put their health and well-being first. And I thought you raised a very interesting point when you talked about energy management as a strategy, particularly about how important and helpful it is to attend cultural events, concerts, nature, do massages. A lot of us would look at those as guilty pleasures. And yet you really, emphasize how important that is in terms of self-care and being able to be a good leader. So thank you for that. I think we all could take a few lessons from what you've just offered us here. We have a couple of questions, and I know we only have a couple minutes. And Michelle just actually kind of echoed what I said. As a leader, I sometimes feel guilty in those pressure-filled moments to take time for myself when my team is also drowning. How do you recommend moving into rest and digest in the heat of the moment during high pressure times? Thank you, Michelle Stoll.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle, and thanks, Tracy. I think it really, you have to go further upstream, and you have to have it planned and on the calendar to trick your brain into thinking that this was all part of the scheme. Because you're going to come back after you go to the show or you take a break, whatever it is that you have planned, and typically nothing's going to fall apart in the time that you go to see a play or something like that. The other thing to note is that you are modeling for other people a way to live fully as a leader, and that can sometimes get people past that hump of guilt.
Great, thanks, James. Victoria writes in, this may be our last question, but I have been called high maintenance for doing self-care, so I started falling off the wagon. But now that I have blocked out time on my calendar for the gym, meal breaks, etc., this talk gave me more conviction to keep at it. So I think that's an affirmation of everything you're saying. We know we all need to practice, and you validated that. Just quickly, one more minute. If someone was to start with this type of a transformation, are there better or worse entry points, and how would you determine where to start as a leader?
Yeah, the first thing I would look for is, and this is a very common question, the first thing I would look for is what's closest, what's easiest. We want to experience success with this. So something that you've been working on and maybe your workouts have fallen off or something like that, or you're paying for a gym membership that you're not using. Let's try to look at that found stuff first. And then the second thing I would say is just objectively sleep. This is sometimes the hardest thing for people to address because it's so many factors and so many variables, but sleep is king. And it starts to allow you to make better decisions on your self-care and performance because you're getting that restorative sleep.
Absolutely. And I'm afraid we're out of time. We have a lot of information here from James. I'm sure he welcomes you reaching out with other questions.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, James, for this very informative and well-articulated session. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.